Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College, and today is January 21st, 2010. Today I'm interviewing Bill Noe and Aouicha Hilliard.
Hello, I'm Aouicha Hilliard. Would you like me to introduce Professor of French and Director of the Office of International Education.
And I'm Bill Noe, retired professor of German, and I have been at Randolph-Macon for a long, long time, coming here first in 1963. How did I happen to come to Randolph-Macon? Money. My salary was $7,500 a year, so you can see how very attractive that was to me. Interestingly, 8 years later, when Dr. Gilhoff, who was chairman of the department, retired, I went to Chicago to a meeting of the Modern Language Society to interview replacements for him. And the salary that I was able to offer in 1972 was $9,000 a year. So there was a lot of big money involved. I happened to come to Randolph-Macon in answer to an ad from some teachers' organization, recruiting agency. And Dr. Moreland was president of the college at that time. His office was in the basement of Mary Branch dormitory, along with the dean of the college and the dean of students. And my office was in Haley Hall, not in Haley Hall, in Fox Hall, and there were four of us who shared the office. Dr. Gilhoff, who was chairman of the German department, Dr. Robert Epps Jones, who was chairman of the classics department, and Dr. Odom, who was also a professor of classics. So four of us shared the office, and my classes were taught in a wooden building left over from World War II, which was over on the corner between where the library now is and football field. And quite a few years later, Haley Hall was built, and so the language departments moved into Haley Hall. And interestingly, the place, all of Ashland, sort of sits in a saucer. Mm-hmm. And even though it's the highest point between Richmond and Washington, D.C., all of the water stands in this saucer that we're sitting in. So there was a big ditch or canal between the library and Haley Hall, and there was a bridge that led from here over to Haley Hall. At that time, practically everybody wanted to study German. They all thought they wanted to become nuclear scientists, and they thought they should have German for this. And so many of my classes had as many as 45 people in them. And I taught 6 courses, 6 days a week. And I was working on completing my PhD, so I commuted to George Washington University first, and then the University of Virginia. So I taught 6 courses, 6 days a week at Randolph-Macon, and took 5 courses at George Washington at the same time. And I also was a priest in charge of a church in Montpelier at the same time. And in 1964, the year after I came, I got married. And my wife and I built a house in College Park So I was teaching and going to school and
Ministering.
ministering and building a house and breaking in a new wife. Frantic times,
Yes.
but a lot of fun. So maybe I should stop talking and let Aouicha get in a word or two.
I am fascinated because I think I came maybe just barely 15 years after you, 1978. But that was already, I was in Haley Hall, had been built, and I think the teaching load was not what it was during your time. People, if they shared offices, it was not 4 to an office. But to go back to the beginning, both my husband and I decided when we were in graduate school, the first person to get a job, the other one will follow. He got a job at the University of Richmond first, and I was expecting. So I said, "All right, I guess I'll be the one to follow." And I had written letters of inquiry of all the schools in the Richmond area, and said that I would be available after my baby was born. So and I didn't hear from anybody until actually my baby was born, and I heard from Dave Chalice. And it was, I think it was like a banner year, 78. There were many more students who enrolled than they expected. And they needed somebody to teach one section of the French 215, the intensive intermediate. So that was my introduction to the college, and after that, I think the enrollment did not go up, but it did not go down either. So there was always enough courses, 1 or 2, for me until 1983. The fall of 1983 is when I started my full-time position. And in Haley, in office, I think I did share actually an office with Dave Chalice. He was the chair of the Department of Romance Languages, and his area was Spanish, by the way. So that's how I came to...
Thinking of that period when Robert Berendt came in 1972, well, let me back up. The students all seemed to pass through these phases. First, everybody wanted to be a nuclear scientist, an astronaut, and so they were all studying German. And then they all decided they wanted to, quote, help people. And so sociologists sprang into full action. And then after that, they decided they wanted to make money, and so everybody started majoring in economics and business. But in 1972, there was a great decline in the study of languages all over the country, and many universities, colleges and universities were just closing down language departments or reducing the size. So when I went to Chicago to the MLA convention to interview people, for $9,000 we had not run ads anywhere, and I put up a 3x5 card on a wall there saying that we were looking for someone to teach German at Randolph-Macon College for $9,000. I was there for 2 days, and all day long, from early morning until night, I interviewed somebody every 15 minutes trying to get this position. And when I left, there was a whole train of people from top-notch schools all around the country following me out to the taxi, trying to give me their business card to get this $9,000 job.
Yeah, those were bad years for the languages. I remember I was still in graduate school. I didn't get my doctorate until 1976. And I remember my schoolmates and I wondering, why are we really doing this? Because we're not sure that we will have a job. So that's why I thought that 1977, 78, I can't remember exactly, must have been a rather unusual year, because, well, I owe my job to the unusual year. Yes, those were difficult times. Ironically, right? Because 1973 wasn't that the yes, I'm not getting my years wrong, am I? And I guess awareness of the global, situation.
Yes, it bounced back very soon.
That you have to know something about other countries, other cultures, certainly other languages, and yet, I mean, it's kind of paradox, right? As the world goes on fire, we were withdrawing and saying you don't need to learn foreign languages.
Right.
But I guess we've lived with this contradiction and we continue to live with it. So
I was in the Air Force Reserve, and I was called to active duty because they were dying to get people to who were proficient in foreign languages. So I was called back from Germany to the United States because they sincerely needed language intelligence officers. So what happened as soon as I got back, I was sent to a supply officer school in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and from there to a remote radar station in Iceland, 250 miles from the base. And the foreign language benefit apparently was not as great for the Air Force as I thought. But in any event, when I came to Randolph-Macon, well, before I came to Randolph-Macon, let me go way back to when I was in college, and I majored in German, and then as a result of an ad, also the University of the South, where I was a student, did not have any sort of foreign language or international exchange program. So I saw some sort of brochure, maybe the German department provided it to me, about a summer program, a summer semester at the University of Vienna in Austria. And it was not a college-sponsored exchange program, but I went to Vienna to this program at the University of Vienna. And there were students from everywhere in this program for foreign students there. So I got a lot of international exposure from people from all sorts of places. And then I came back to Sewanee and graduated, and then I had a Fulbright scholarship to study at the University of Heidelberg, and this again had a tremendous impact on my whole life. And so when I came to Randolph-Macon, the first thing I wanted to do was do something to enable other people to share this kind of experience. So almost immediately I went over and talked to Dr. Moreland and asked him about setting up some kind of program, and he said they didn't have anybody to do all of these arrangements, and he just didn't think it was very practical. But Dr. Moreland was deeply involved himself in the National Council of Churches, and he'd been to a number of meetings in Europe, and so he was especially interested in German bishops for some reason, and he was responsive to this idea of trying to do something in Germany. So the agreement we worked out was that I would make all of the arrangements, housing arrangements, transportation arrangements, everything, and the college then would pay me $1,000 to take a group of students, which I would have to recruit, to Europe and teach them there.
For how long, Bill?
For 9 weeks.
Okay.
So that first year, 1963, we had 9 students, and one of them had never had any German before, so I told him if he would come into my office several times a week until the summer came. If he was able to handle this, then he could come along with us, because I wasn't going to teach first-year German that summer.
So this was in the summer course, the summer program.
For 9 weeks. And in fact, was very good at this. When my wife came over later in the year, and this guy who'd never had a word of German in his life sat down and described to her beautifully in German his trip to Vienna and all of his experiences there. And she said, "You're either Jewish or have spoken Yiddish, or for some reason you've had some exposure to German before." But no, he didn't. So first place we set up shop was in this little town of Bad Honnef. It was 30 minutes from Bonn, which was in the capital of Germany, by streetcar, and just a little bit longer to Cologne by streetcar. And the reason I selected Bad Honnef was because that's where the Fulbright Commission had its orientation program when I had been a student there, although they were no longer going to Bad Honnef. So we had a what do you call them? Guest house in German, pension, I guess you would say, in which all of these 9 students lived with me, and then I would teach them 2 hours a day. In subsequent years, I had 3 levels, first, second, and third year German, and I would teach them 2 hours a day each, and then they would go out and go to the laundry, and I remember one student coming in and saying the laundry had torn the sleeve out of his shirt, and he wanted me to come get repayment for this, and there's nothing doing. You go get the money yourself, and he did. But I would teach them 2 hours a day, and then for 5 days, and then they would go off. They all had Eurail passes, and they would go off to Paris or Spain or anywhere they wanted to go. This place was 4 hours from Amsterdam, 5 hours from Paris.
Excellent.
And it seemed to me that, one thing I forgot about this was, I said it was near Bonn, and the then Chancellor of Germany, Konrad Adenauer, first Chancellor of Germany after World War II, lived just a couple of miles from where we were, and he and Charles de Gaulle were very much interested in international exchange, and they had set up a program for French students near Chancellor Adenauer's house in Rhondorf. So Chancellor Adenauer heard about our program, and he invited me to bring my students to his home on 2 occasions, that year and the following year, and meet him and talk about all of this international exchange. So it just seemed to me an ideal place. It was near the French border, near the Dutch border, and there was an international feeling about it. The capital of Germany was there, and this was really someplace where it should be good to put down roots and get an international program started. So I started looking around for places, and there was an old building. It turned out to be my greatest disappointment. It had been built in 1720. In fact, this is a picture of it by monks. It was a house that had 19 rooms in it, and an adjacent carriage house which had 6 rooms in it. And the person who owned it was dying. It was sort of like the Robert Browning's poem, "The Bishop Orders His Tomb at St. Praxed's Church," where he's dying and he doesn't know what to do with this house. He doesn't want anything to happen to it. And so I talked to him about it, and we sent, when I came back home, special delivery, airmail letters back and forth, trying to see what could be done about this. program. And as I said, this was 19 rooms, a full basement, full attic above it, and almost a block included with a fence. And he agreed to sell it for $50,000 if it could be used as a headquarters for an international studies program. I went to the Monument Trust first in Cologne, which was a provincial capital, and then in Bonn. And they agreed to help with first of all, they would make all of the outside renovation on it, and they would help with putting in new plumbing and heating and bathrooms and this sort of thing. And it would be under Monument Trust. The interior could be changed, and they would grant Randolph-Macon a long-term, no closing date loan of this $50,000 without interest.
Wow.
And I came back and presented this to Dr. Moreland, and he wrote me a letter saying that he had discussed the matter with 2 members of the Board of Trustees, and they didn't really think the time was ripe for this kind of thing. And so then he had brought it up at the trustees meeting in the fall, and they decided that they would discuss it further when they met in the spring. And in the meantime, a real estate dealer from Dusseldorf came and bought it and tore the whole thing down, built apartments there. So that was my greatest disappointment in the whole international program.
But the summer school did continue
It continued until, for 6 years. And after we'd been in Bad Honnef, I then made arrangements with a place called Bugenhagen Internat, which was a preparatory school with live-in students in a place called Timmendorfer Strand in the very northern part of Germany. And so we would go to Timmendorfer Strand first in the summer and live in with the students in this private school. And it was a beach, and so we dig big holes in the sand and just make a sort of fort in the sand and sit out on this beach, and that's where I'd teach them in the sand. Then we'd go to Bad Honnef in the middle of, from north to south, and then set up something in Austria, in a little town near the Austrian-Swiss border, and so we'd go there as a third place, giving them some exposure to different dialects and customs and all of this sort of thing. So this whole program kept going until, as I said, in the summer until, well, for 6 years, and then Randolph-Macon adopted largely the influence of Jean Long, who was a philosophy professor. He introduced this idea of the colloquy in January. So we continued to do courses in these January colloquies, but we stopped the summer program at that point.
I really find this summer idea very interesting and intriguing one. What we have since the institution of the colloquy, now we have J-term, which is devoted to unusual courses, and of course travel courses lend themselves to that. And most courses at J-term, travel courses, I would say, lasts maybe an average of 3 weeks. Some go for 2, others go for 4 on the whole. So that's on one end. On the other end, we have been, you may be interested in this, we have been talking about establishing like an extended J-term course that would last a semester. Now, this is not official yet, right?
Yes.
Okay. And one that we've been discussing on to submit it to the curriculum committee and so on, we're waiting to hear from them, would be in Mexico, in Oaxaca, kind of western part of Mexico. And a faculty member would take a group of perhaps 20 students, would teach a couple of courses, and then the students would take courses from the neighboring university for language or other courses. Yes. So I find this really very interesting. Having experienced this summer format, to which I will add that we may be returning. A colleague of mine in French is offering to teach 5 or 6 week long, actually, course in France, foreign literature in English translation. But we have not gone back to this 9 week. That's a period. That's a very it's a good amount of time. It yes. takes most of the summer, didn't it?
That's right.
A lot of learning can take place. I can't believe that you taught, I think that's what you meant, right? 3 times 2 hours a week, a day?
That's right.
I don't think we should broadcast this, Lynda, because I don't want any administrator to get any ideas about yes. teaching 3 courses, 2 hours a day. That's a lot.
What give you some idea of the impact? Just a couple of instances. We had a student who applied for admission to Randolph-Macon. He'd had terrible grades in high school. He was not able to get into the University of Virginia, even though his father was on the board of visitors there. And he applied at Randolph-Macon. And I don't remember whether it was the dean or who said, well, you can enroll in this summer course and we'll see how you do. And so he did. And then they would reconsider his admission possibilities in the fall. He came back, majored in psychology, graduated Phi Beta Kappa, went on and got his PhD, taught at the University of Hawaii for a number of years, came back to Eastern Virginia Medical School and became a brain specialist. And it just changed his whole life. Something turned him on. And I think of another instance of a student who I guess was maybe a sophomore, and he was flunking out of Randolph-Macon. He went and talked to with his father, went and talked to Dr. Mabry, who was the dean of the college then, with his rather influential father, I might say. And finally, I went and talked to Dr. Mabry and said, why don't you let this boy come with me to Germany and see how he does and when he comes back. And so they agreed to do that. He went to Germany, came back, had a brilliant career at Randolph-Macon. Is and has been for quite a few years a member of the Board of Trustees. There are 6 of those students of mine who are on the Board of Trustees right now. And it just, in so many instances, turned their whole lives around to have this something that turned them on.
Yeah.
And then another instance I think of, the largest this program ever was 25 students in the summertime.
That is large.
But
for a single professor, you were always the only one?
Yes.
Yeah, that is very large. Yeah.
One student's mother wrote me that her son had written a letter before he left Germany to come back saying, if the plane should crash on the way home and I get killed, I want you to know that my life has been fulfilled.
Wow.
And there's another person, he's now a retired teacher of German. a runner-up for the top teacher of the year for the United States. And he went on this trip to Germany with me and then came back and taught high school. He got his master's degree from UVA and then taught high school until now. He just retired last year. But he's taken every year since he graduated students to Europe to do exactly the kind of thing that was involved in this program which we were engaged in. So there's just, you don't know how far it's reached out to
It does.
other
It
people,
does,
other
yes.
generations,
Yeah.
all over the place.
Well, they can't help being affected by that experience. I mean, just learning to express themselves in another language, by definition, puts them in the shoes, so to speak, of this other person, other culture, and almost automatically, makes them view the world through the eyes, the lens of that other person, culture, and so on. It has to be transforming. I mean, you do
Yes.
become another person, bigger person, more open, more tolerant, and more aware at all times of the rest of the world. Yeah.
So, moving into some other fields, there are two or three. Well, before we leave that, it's not easy. You were talking about starting a new program maybe for a semester. I found the faculty at Randolph-Macon to be resistant. It was astonishing to me, resistant to starting any kind of new program like this. And for example, one year I spent an entire year corresponding with and visiting and personally talking to all sorts of employers, because I had encouraged a couple of students to go and get jobs in Germany. One worked, for example, in a plant nursery in northern Germany for the summer, and another one worked for a Hertz auto rental place in Cologne. And so this whole idea of internships struck me hard, like a hammer, after these two students had this experience. So I spent a whole year communicating with employers in Germany who might be able to take this on, and I presented the faculty with a proposal to start internships, which we didn't have in the college at all at that point, in Germany. And I gave them a list of people who would employ the students, where the areas where they might go and what effect this might have on them. And the curriculum committee decided not to do this because they said there wouldn't be enough for the professor to do.
Oh. I think things are a little bit different, happily so. I think the outlook, of the campus has become more international. People are more aware of the need, our need, and the need for our students to be connected with the rest of the world, to be able to manage in the rest of the world. And I really don't foresee resistance on the part of our curriculum committee. My worry is more at the administrative level. I think if the starting of the program is going to be connected to finances, that might slow things down. And I really hope that whoever decides on the start, giving the final green light on this project, will do what our administrators didn't do when you wanted to purchase that house which would be worth. That's my only concern. I am really more hopeful about our colleagues and stand on establishing international programs. And I've worked with many of them, with several committees and so on, and they've been very open and very
Thinking
supportive.
of houses, that was another interest of mine, was in having a German house or a foreign language house. There was resistance to that too, but it was overcome, and we did have this big old house right over by the tennis courts. And
that's right.
I guess that went on. Well, we had an exchange student from Germany here that year, and she lived in the house, and they would speak only German, and we had some classes in the house, and there was a kitchen, and they could cook German dishes and things of this sort, but it lasted 2 or 3 years. The house was finally torn down. So.
Well, you may be pleased to know that we have an international house.
Do you?
We try to have language halls and language house, and we never, because of this kind of attrition on language enrollment and so on, we never had enough students in French, in German, and Spanish to sustain single houses.
Yes.
But the international house houses international students who are coming here to study for all 4 years, or who are exchange students, like the students from Germany, but also American students, domestic students, who are interested in the rest of the world. And it's really working very well. We have a house manager, they have programs, all sorts of things.
That's very good.
Actually, I want to add something. Really want to say I'm very, very grateful to one of the trustees who donated, heard about the International House, and understood that international students are here to learn about American culture, just as our domestic students sign up to live at the International House to learn about the rest of the world. And he paid for, what is that TV, the new TVs called, those fancy ones, the flat, Wright. And he paid for that. It's at the house. And also for educational programs, cultural programs. So international students will view these American programs to learn about American culture. Our domestic students will be viewing the other programs. And we even established like an assessment program that the house manager, a student who is a senior Spanish major, will basically, she will test everybody kind of at the end of the year. So this kind of thing really gift, concern, interest in whatever really accomplishes a whole lot in as far as the internationalization, education, awareness of the world, and so on is concerned. And the German students, I think we have 3 exchange students from Germany who are living in the house.
Very good.
So German is spoken.
It's still surviving.
In a house. In a house. Yeah.
Well, another thing I got involved in was this whole business. Randolph-Macon was, among other things, in what I now regard as dire financial straits at one point. And so I guess this was when Wright was president. They started considering the possibility of admitting women at Randolph-Macon. Well, I was on a committee which was called a Student Life Committee, which was chaired by Dr. Burnell Pannell, who was a professor of philosophy. And our task was to explore this whole idea of coeducation at Randolph-Macon, which I had been to an all-male prep school and an all-male college, and I went into an all-male Air Force and an all-male theological school. Everything I had been associated with had been all-male. So I did not go into this with great enthusiasm, but we spent a year studying this, and it turned out that I was the person who made the motion in that committee to admit women, and the committee approved it and made the presentation to the president and he to the board of trustees, and here we are.
Amazing changes. Well, this is the one thing that is exciting, though. I assume it happens at other schools too, but this possibility for one person, a group of people, a committee, to really bring about very big changes,
Yes.
big transformations. And you're talking about the student life committee, college life committee is what we call it. I don't know, maybe it has
may have
changed.
been,
Maybe changed.
remember the exact.
But I remember, was it 10 years ago? I can't remember. Steve Toole in religious studies was the chairman of this college life committee, and I know the committee had been discussing various ways of giving some sort of common experience to the students. And one idea that had been suggested was to develop a seminar for freshmen. So I thought, this is something I'm really interested in, and I want to go see. You know, the committee meetings are open to everybody. So I went, and what they had in mind was a seminar about study skills. And I thought, this won't bring people together. I thought, I was thinking more of a course like a common readings.
Yes.
You know, everybody would be reading the same thing, and everybody would discuss them and so on. Anyway, that was the beginning of this college discussion about curricular reform,
Yes.
which led to the constitution of the Curriculum Review Committee, which led to the new curriculum that we currently have with the first-year colloquium. So it's wonderful. I mean, this is one of the things that's very exciting. You know, you can see history in the
amazing
making.
how it all just developed.
Yeah, that is very exciting. Yeah.
I guess one of the intense moments in the thinking of the faculty at Randolph-Macon was the Vietnam War, and all of these schools all around the country were having riots and burning buildings and people getting shot and all sorts of things. So there was great fear that something traumatic was going to happen at Randolph-Macon. Well, the only thing that happened was somebody went over and built a little fire about the size of this little table on the front steps of Peel Hall. And that was the extent of the protest of the Vietnam War at Randolph-Macon. Another sort of highlight, I guess, in the time I was here was Randolph-Macon applying to the National Labor Relations Board for collective bargaining at Randolph-Macon.
That was before my time.
And
Yes.
Luther Wright was the president then, and I had been nominated to be the president of AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, on campus. And I went over and talked to Luther, and I said, I'm sure this is something that's coming up at Randolph-Macon. I want to get some feedback from you as to how you think this might turn out or how the college might be affected. And before I accept this nomination, he said, I think you should go right ahead and accept it, and that's going to be no problem at all. The college was in bad financial shape to start with. And I guess all colleges always are. But Randolph-Macon was really having a hard time. And the faculty felt that they had very little say about what was going on in the college. They were sort of put aside, although it's hard to imagine that people could feel that way, because when Dr. Moreland was president, he was the absolute dictator. He ran all faculty meetings. The dean never got to speak. Everything was done on his command. But at this point, the faculty felt that they were not having enough input into the curriculum and things like this. And so I was a representative of the faculty to the Board of Trustees. That is, you only got to go in and present some ideas to the Board of Trustees at some point, and they then dismissed you, and you never heard from them again, or you never knew whether they took up your ideas. But I was sitting next to Mr. Lipscomb, who was the vice president of Pan American Airways, and he'd been the chairman of the Board of Trustees here. And so I tried to present some of the faculty complaints, and he leaned over and put his hand on my knee, and he said, that all sounds very good, but it'll never happen. Well,
and what was the year, Bill? What was the year? When was that?
I don't remember what year it was.
Roughly? Okay.
But I guess Luther Wright was the president then still. And
70s. Okay.
We had a history professor here named Jerry Bledsoe, and he was the ringleader in trying to do something about getting this collective bargaining started. I think he went on in this labor organizing bit after he left here for a number of years, but in any case he was trying to whip up the collective bargaining. And as president of the AAUP, I was going to have to be the one to submit the application to the National Labor Relations Board for this election. And I definitely was not interested in having the campus organized, but that was my job. So they passed around a petition for people to sign, and it's supposed to be a secret ballot or whatever it is that you send in, petition. I still have that copy with all of the names of the people who signed it. And anybody would be amazed that the most conservative people and the most liberal people on campus signed it, people you never would have imagined would sign it. So an election was held. I was at Myrtle Beach when I filled out all these forms and sent them into the National Labor Relations Board. And when I came back one night, I walked in the house, the phone was ringing, and this was somebody from the Times-Dispatch they understood that I had submitted this application to the National Labor Relations Board, and they wanted me to comment. And I said, I've been on vacation. I just walked into the house when the phone was ringing. I can't talk to you right now. I'll call you back in a little while and give you what information I can. I came straight over to Luther White's house and said, the Times-Dispatch is on the phone. They want me to give them a statement, and I want to get some feedback from you as to how you feel about this, and maybe give me some guidance as to how I can give them a statement in some way that won't cause damage to the college. And he said, well, go right ahead, feel free to make a statement to them. I went back home and called the Times-Dispatch back, and he said, you don't need to give me a statement because I know you went to see President White, and he got up and talked to me on the phone. The election was held. The voting was done in the lobby of Haley Hall. My office was the first office, past the first classroom. And so all of people who were backing this thing were sitting outside my office in the hall watching the people come in and vote. You could only be within 50 feet or something of the polls. And the college attorney was Mr. Pollard, former lieutenant governor of Virginia. And he was sitting there as close to the line as you could get from the polls. And his hand was trembling as if he had palsy while this voting was going on. But in the end, the vote turned it down. It was not adopted, which in my judgment was good, but it made Mr. Lipscomb, who was the chairman of the Board of Trustees, and other members of the trustees, and I guess the administration, realized that people were serious about something and deeply concerned. And so I would say the person who's sort of the savior of Randolph-Macon, a person who should have been honored greatly but got no real credit for anything, I think, is a man named Hunter Jones. He was a Randolph-Macon alumnus and an accountant. And he lived here in Ashland, his office in Richmond. He was also a member of the Board of Trustees at that time, and he just went through everything that affected the college financially, and among other things determined that the college had been selling off some of its most valuable stocks and assets of that sort, and holding on to stuff that was not much good in order to keep the college afloat until something turned around, maybe like having women come in as students.
Right.
But he made it clear to the Board of Trustees that this place was about to sink and what they had to do to turn it around financially. And the whole course, direction of the college was changed, and fortunately it thrived after that. But he's one of the forgotten men that I think is most responsible for the success of this college.
He had the foresight. No, yeah. Extraordinary. I didn't live through this part of the history of the college, but you hear that things happened, but I never knew that you were
Yes.
the thick of things.
Well, there weren't many of us around, so everybody was in the
Okay.
thick of things.
Okay.
That's a question. Do you remember a transition from the time of summer school, the international summer school of 9 weeks for 6 or 9 years? Do you remember transition from that to a semester study, or was there a big gap?
No, I immediately started teaching the course in January in Germany instead of in the summertime. And I did a number of courses on Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. And we went to Berlin and met with people who had lived through all this, and the students were able to go to what was then called the American German Document Center, which had all of the files from the whole Nazi era, the party membership cards from Hermann Goering and everybody who was anybody, and even the lowliest of people they had. This was all underground, and there were records from everybody in Germany. The students were all required to look up their ancestry and through all of this, and then they were able to talk to the people running it. We met with a man who had been the commandant of the prison in which Hermann Hesse was the only prisoner in that prison, and he was able to talk to Hermann Hesse personally over a period of years while he was a commandant there. He spoke to my students, and then he flew to Munich, where we were going next, and spent hours lecturing with these students. I did, those courses were done in Berlin and in Munich, because Munich was a place where the Third Reich, Hitler, got started. And then I did a number of courses on King Ludwig II of Bavaria and Richard Wagner. So the students were able, first of all, in the Opera House in Munich, to attend all these operas. And I remember on one occasion, we had one student from somewhere on the south side of Virginia, Emporia or someplace like that, and he'd never been to an opera, and he absolutely did not want to go to an opera. And I said, you have to go to this one. And we were late getting there, and when we came in, the whole place was filled. And that Munich Opera House was something that was quite formal. People would wear evening clothes, and in the intermissions they would walk up and down the corridors. And when my students came in, they turned out they were coming in from different doors, and this one guy had on a Madras jacket, and he had to go in with these people with their tuxedos on, and they all had to stand up, and he went all the way across that whole opera house in his Madras jacket. But in any case, he saw that one opera, and he was captured for life. He just became an absolute opera addict after that. And then we went to Bayreuth, to Wagner's home, and to the opera house in Bayreuth, and just by chance happened to be there when Richard Wagner's granddaughter was walking into the building, and she stopped and talked to the students for a long time. So there were a lot of personal contacts like that enhanced their Germany experience.
Close.
So
Wonderful.
in answer to your question, we just moved right over from the summer program into the January term.
Yes. There was, I don't know if you knew Penny Jez. It was a person who was, I'm not sure exactly when she started working at Randolph-Macon, but I think she was teaching part-time in the English department, and then she started working, I think on a half-time basis, in an Office of International Education. And she established the first semester-long programs. She established 3 programs. This is in the early, mid-'80s. Program at Roxton College. There again, there was a missed opportunity to purchase
In England.
In England, to purchase an abbey, really a manor, okay?
Yes.
And then Fairleigh Dickinson University decided to buy it, and that was really a missed opportunity again. So in England, Roxton, at Tübingen.
Tübingen.
Yes. You knew about that program?
I know that I went to Tübingen.
So you were probably the one who
and
started
met
it?
with the international
So, yes.
people who ran their international program there, and we had everything set up. And Dean Garris went to Europe to
That's right.
try to make some establishment with these various colleges. And I went into his office while he was gone and asked his secretary when he was arriving in Tübingen, and She said, well, he's in Munich right now. Well, I didn't know he was thinking of starting anything in Munich, but I called a friend of mine in Munich immediately and said, I understand the dean is there, and I'd like for you to get him an appointment with the rector of the University of Munich. And they said, no problem. They got him an appointment with the rector, who happened to also be the head of the veterinary school. So Dean Garris went there and waded through animal blood to get to this man. But apparently they didn't discuss anything seriously about it. And so then I asked Dean Garris' secretary when he was going to be going to Tübingen. And she said he decided not to go to Tübingen after this program had already been totally set up. So I don't know whether there was ever a program in Tübingen.
But not a direct one. We ended up going through Antioch University. Antioch we're not with them anymore, a program at Tübingen, and we signed basically some kind of agreement with Antioch University, and our students were going to Tübingen until we started our relationship with Marburg University, which is the program that Robert Berendt initiated. It's been what, 8, 9, 10 years that he's done that. He did what you did, went to Marburg and discussed, various terms of it's an exchange program. Semester or year. Actually, no, it's been a year. We just started discussing the possibility of a semester. But it's been a year, and it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for our students. The German students have always told Robert, it's our best program. Our program to Germany is really the best because the students have to go for a year and they come back and they're fluent.
Yes.
There's no question about it. They go, many of them go just barely after they've completed German 212, which is just the intermediate level. And they come back and they're speaking German fluently. That's my dream. Everybody goes for a year. We're not there yet.
We did have a number of students who, on their own, spent a semester or a year in Germany, in Heidelberg and in Marburg and the Goethe Institute and places like that. I remember one young lady who went to the Goethe Institute for the summer, and when she came back, she didn't speak German at all, but she could barely speak English. Everything was so haltingly spoken, as if she were a foreigner. So it didn't always take.
That's very funny. So these are just I just listed two, and the third one, and that's Penny Jazz. This person had established was a program in Spain, which we no longer have. And then in the mid-'80s, 85, 86, we had a new colleague in French, Flo Martin. I don't know if you remember her. She was from France. And she was basically on loan, I think, to us from Goucher College. And she was very interested in developing a program, study abroad program in France. And worked very hard at establishing a program with the Sorbonne. Very expensive, and we are doing other things now. And then we just kept adding other programs, mostly exchange programs, because they are less costly. And they have the added benefit of bringing us international students. So it really was advantageous to go the exchange program route.
Have we exhausted you?
No, this is a fascinating history of the international education here, though. It's wonderful. I'll let you all have any concluding remarks or summaries you might want to make about the international education or about anything.
I'm sure that we'll remember them as soon as we've left here. A lot of years to remember. It's been fun remembering them. It's always interesting to me to come back to Haley Hall and see those pin oak trees that are about this big around, which were planted after Haley Hall was built. So you know that time has passed.
I think we made a lot of progress over the years in increasing the awareness of both faculty and students about the importance of knowing another language, knowing another culture, living in another culture. But we really have a long way to go, as they say, simply because the rest of the world is not waiting and it's moving fast.
Yes.
I like the J term option. It's better than nothing, but it's not nearly as effective, I think, if you're talking about teaching students about another culture, as your 9-week program obviously was. In 9 weeks, students can learn the language. They can learn something of the culture. They stay there long enough to have it really affect them. That's the route I would like to see us take. First of all, have more students go abroad, but not go abroad for less than the 9 weeks. 9 weeks, a semester, a year. If it's going to leave a significant mark on them, the way it did on the students you were remembering so fondly, we have kind of a dilemma here. Many students, when they come as freshmen, tell me that very often they choose to come to Randolph-Macon because of the study abroad options. And then a year later, I wait for them to apply to go abroad for a semester or a year, and so many of them have changed their mind. And I always say, why? It's because they are very comfortable here.
Yes.
They are too comfortable here. And all those things. And of course, the students who take the plunge and who say, I know I'm leaving all the things I'm interested in and go abroad. They come back and they feel they have not missed anything. They have so many years they have outgrown what they left behind them. And I always say, well, tell me what to tell the other students to convince them that they will not miss anything. And they always say, there's nothing you can tell them. They have to experience it. So that's my source of frustration. I see what happens to the students who come back, just as Bill was describing. It does transform them. They grow up and they grow and they mature and they become sophisticated and they become independent and they're so curious and all those and I think they can probably handle themselves in the world and with all its new challenges so much better. But how can I convince the others that this is what...
This mother of one of these students from LSU who went to Germany with me has told me many times, my son left here as a boy and he came back as a man.
They used to say that about war,
Yes.
but this is a way of achieving the same thing and more without war.
Austria came to the United States and became American citizens. And I think we transformed a number of the communities that we went to there. Also, it worked the other way. For example, after we were doing the January terms, I often would have them stay for another week between semesters, and we'd go skiing in the Austrian Alps. And one of these students said to me he would really like to get a job there. So I said, "Oh, why don't you talk to the man who owns this hotel?" So he did, and he didn't come back with us. He stayed there and ran a ski lift for a year, and then he came back and had some much more solid idea about what he wanted to do with his life. But he did come back. Luther Wright once said to me, some parents of one of our girls said that she had told them she wanted to take a year off and just sort of get herself together and then come back and finish her education. And he said, I told them, absolutely do not let her do that. Make her finish her education here, and then she can go and find herself. He said, don't you think I gave them good advice? I said, I think you gave them terrible advice.
That's right. To get themselves together, sometimes they need that separation, so that they can look at themselves and make the right decisions about what to do next. And it's that distance, that time, that allows them to do the thinking. Just sometimes that's what they need. They don't need to be in school if they're not sure that they want to be there.
Well, I would say, on the whole, Randolph-Macon has turned out some very fine citizens.
We have. I agree. Even my time here, since 1978 or 79, however you want to calculate it, I've seen the latest actually example is an alumna French major. I always remember her by her maiden name, Cindy Crable, who loved traveling, and she taught for a while. She did several things, and then she told me when she came for homecoming, she came back to campus. She's now a vice president with United and big job with responsibility. She said, and I decided to go work with United because I wanted to travel. And
Yes.
It did wonders for me. And now she has a volunteer organization. She goes to Cambodia almost all the time, works with small children, encourages them to come to the U.S. And this J term, she opened an internship at United for one of our students, and our first one, a French major, Courtney Hilton, is the first intern at United with our alumna who discovered the world and is doing wonderful things with what she discovered. So that's just the latest in the list of all the wonderful ones we've had. So I agree completely.
Yeah, it's just the other night I saw this program with Governor Huckabee, and he was interviewing 3 of the top novelists in this country, best-selling novelists. And one of them was Ted Bell. Ted Bell graduated here. He was on the board of trustees here, and he also went to Germany with me. His father was a vice president of, I can't remember what airline, some major airline. And we were coming back from Germany and got on went out to the Bonn-Cologne airport to return to the States. And as we were getting on the plane, I noticed that there was a great big place on the tire on this plane that had the fabric showing through the plane. And there was a group of men who started walking out from the airport to the plane, and it turned out it was Willy Brandt, who was then Chancellor of Germany, and his entourage, and the last 2 planes he had been on had been sabotaged. So that raised my concern a little more, and the plane took off, and it seemed that we were only a couple of 100 feet in the air when the thing just started swaying all over the place, and immediately the hostesses came around and brought free drinks to everybody. So I thought there's a real problem, and then I looked out the window,
Was your tie?
And Ted Bell was sitting right behind me. I looked out the window, and the whole inside of this outboard engine was melting and on fire, and it was all running out. The pilot said, "We're having a little difficulty, and we will be dumping fuel for a while." So they're dumping this fuel right there where the fire was in that engine. And we circled the field for about 45 minutes, and the pilot came on again and said, "We've decided we're going to fly to Frankfurt, where they have more safety facilities." And I knew that if that outboard engine on the right-hand side is on fire, he's going to have to come in with that wing up and the other one down, right where the tire has all the fabric showing. So it was not a very comfortable flight, but we got to Frankfurt.
Well, Bill has been close to very historical.
And we were in Munich when all the Israelis were assassinated at the Olympics.
Yes.
And
yes.
You were in Munich that summer.
yes,
Wow.
and in the airport, I remember some men coming in with Arabic
Flowing
robes, yes, and the airport security followed them everywhere, into the bathroom, everywhere they went. And flying in from Hamburg to Munich, when we got to Munich, there was a table set up. You had to go through a door, like the width of that one. And the outfit called the Bader Meinhof gang had said they were going to shoot down a plane between Hamburg and Munich. And we got on the ground in Munich, but when we walked through that little hallway, they took everything we had, and they took my pocket calculator all to pieces and laid it out on a table. And then as we walked on past this table, I looked out the window, and there was a tank sitting there with his cannon aimed right at where we were walking through that hall. So there were some exciting experiences also in doing one of these courses on Hitler, and we were in Berlin, I went into East Berlin, took the students into East Berlin. I had a 1938 travel guide, and so we could see where everything had been. But in any case, there was a young student who asked if he could join us in going through Checkpoint Charlie. And he was from Iowa or someplace like this, very typical Midwesterner. He followed us, went with us everywhere we went on foot all day long. And when we came back out, well, I should back this up. One of my students was a daughter of a major general in the army in Berlin, and he arranged for a bus from the army to come and pick us up when we arrived there. And they took us to all the various places we were going the next day, and apparently somebody thought that we must be somebody important, or there was something curious about the fact that this army outfit was. And when we left, somebody said, "Where's Joe?" And this Joe from Iowa or somewhere just disappeared. Apparently he'd been planted there to follow us around and see what we were doing. And another one of the students was when we had to go through and exchange into East German marks, and ask you all sorts of questions. And one of my students was taken into a room and stripped and kept there for the whole number of hours that we were in East Berlin. And then when we came back out, they finally released him into our custody.
Those are the experiences.
They are, they are. And I guess once we were in J-term in Paris when lots of bombs were going on. They were planted in, trash baskets throughout the city. Another year there were riots or strikes and I think the students, most of them take them in stride. They realize
Yes.
that is part of the culture that they're visiting. And some of them think that, I am being part of history.
There are funny
History is
things that
being
happen
made.
too. For example, this little town of Bad Honnef, the lady who ran the place came and told me there was someone who wanted to see me at the door. And I went down, and it was the federal police. And they said somebody had, my students, of course, had gone at night and taken off the screws and removed the sign from the post office, which they were going to bring back as a souvenir, and they had taken it out and buried it in some vacant lot. So we had to go, next day I had to go there and have them dig it up and put it back up on the post office.
Embarrassing.
And one very amusing instance we had in Austria where there were a couple of guys who were going out for a track here at Randolph-Macon, and so they went out to run about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and ran up this hill, and one of them had on a sweat jacket with a hood, and the other one had on some seersucker pants and shorts, and some guy saw them running up there and called the police and told them there were 2 escaped convicts. One was wearing a mask and the other one was wearing a striped prison suit. So they sent out a general alarm. This was all in the Vienna paper the next day. All these police were chasing them and finally converged in this town square right in front of the place where we were living. They pinned them between 2 police cars and took them off to jail. And so they called me, and I went down to try to get them out of jail, and I had on the same seersucker pants as the guy they arrested.
That's probably good.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, we do have interesting adventures with them. Yes, we
Well,
do.
I'm sure I've worn you out in any case.
I am absolutely thrilled because so many of these things I just didn't know. Go ahead, Lynda.
Well, thank you so much for these wonderful memories and stories and so much history of Randolph-Macon. Thank you. Professor Noe, I was just wondering if you might be able to say a few words about the Noe Kilgore Award.
One of the students who was with me in Germany, I can't remember whether he went once or twice with me, and he gave the college anonymously $25,000 to set up an award to be presented to retired faculty members who had some particular influence on the lives of students here. And so that's given annually. This year it was given to Bill McElwain. I think the award is, about $1,000 or maybe more now.
That's a wonderful tribute. Thank you.